Hi, this is DM Galabond, and I'm here tonight to tell you a story. A story that starts a new campaign that my group on Thursday night will begin as soon as they finish character creation. This is a story that I will share with them and with you at the same time. It's an ancient story that long predates our game, but it sets the scene and the background. Let us begin. The seeds of our adventure were planted long ago, before the Icewind Dale lent its marking of time to the numbering of years, and before Haptos compiled the various legends and observations and festivals and seasons into the calendar we know and love today in Faerun. Yes, our story begins in the days when the Empire of Netheril was young, and when its greatest scholars and wisest sages were first beginning to tinker with magic. In those days, the elves still considered themselves the stewards of the other sentient races, and the youngest and most fruitful of them, humankind, had barely awakened from the slumber of the clay they had been before the gods shaped them into beings and breathed life into them. Among the Netheril there lived a sorcerer. Ever questing for knowledge, he had sought out every scrap of parchment and every ancient vellum scroll he could find from the tomes of long-dead dwarven kings and tumbled-down elven strongholds all across the face of the world. He knew the drive for this unquenchable thirst for knowledge came from the divine spark that fueled his sorcerous magic. It bade him, prodded him, goaded him, and drove him with a feverish madness to find every secret that had ever been buried and hoard it for himself. "Loral of Imlock," the voice whispered to him one day, "you have done well. Travel to Jixidor, and I will reward your diligent search for knowledge." Even before the voice finished, Loral had started to rise, gathering his scrolls and possessions and beginning the trek to the enclave his god had indicated. When he arrived at the place, he sought an audience with the king, but he was turned away. He begged and he pleaded until at last the palace guards grew rough with him. They beat Loral senseless and dragged him to the center of town and threw him in the street next to the pauper's well, the place where the poor came to fill their jugs and buckets and water skins for their families and their animals. Bleeding and half dead, Loral of Imlock lay in the dust of the street as the hot afternoon sun beat down and baked his skin. The guards threw down his possessions, including his scrolls and his gold, and the folk of the town scavenged them, taking them to sell for coin. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, all of Loral's possessions were gone, and he had been stripped to a loincloth, and feral dogs came to lick the still oozing wounds that the soldiers from the palace had given him earlier in the day. And then a beautiful girl came to the well. Loral was senseless and could hardly appreciate her beauty, as to his eyes she was just a hazy form that swam in the dusty air. "Water," he tried to croak, but what came out was a weak groan of pain, since the beating by the guards had broken his jaw and crushed his throat. And the girl took pity on him. She came to the well every night, Normally she came and waited until she saw the most wretched and impoverished mother she had seen all day come to draw water. And the girl would draw the water for the woman, and when she handed the woman's bucket or vessel back to her, she would be sure to slip a gold coin or two to help the pauper. For the girl was named Casethri, and she was the princess of Jixidor, daughter of its king, whose name time has forgotten because of his wicked ways and his cruelty towards his people. Casethri was not like her father. She was kind-hearted, and when she saw the beaten man by the well, her heart had pity on him. She banged on the doors of shops lining the square, and she begged and she pleaded until several men and women came to help her take the man to an inn, where she paid for his room and sent for a healer to come tend his wounds. Eventually Laurel recovered, and Casethri remained a friend to him. But he was old, and his nose and his jaw did not heal cleanly, and his visage was terrifying to the princess, so she could never love him. But she talked to him, and as he grew stronger, she asked his name. He tried to tell her, but his shattered jaw made speech difficult, and the name she repeated back to him was not Laurel of Imlock, but Larlock. Laurel found he liked the name when it was caressed by the lips of the princess, and he found that he loved her. He was convinced that her love was the gift his God had promised him if he would but come to this city. Larlock, for he began to use the name given to him by the princess, was clever, and he quickly showed that he was adept with sorcery and began to earn coin by helping the people whom Casethri had first recruited to shelter him and tend his wounds. Within a few months, Larlock had enough coin to lease a small shop that he could use as a laboratory with a meager dwelling above it. And within a year, he had earned enough money that he had been able to track down and buy back all the scrolls that had been stolen from him by the poor on the day he was beaten and left for dead by the well. For a time he was happy. He wooed the princess, encouraged by her unceasing visits, and certain that with the right words or the perfect thoughtful gift he could win her heart. But as the first anniversary of his arrival in Jixidor approached, and he instead saw the princess in the company of young suitors from noble families in the town, his heart began to break, and it started to turn black. That's when his patron spoke to him again. "Her love is not the gift I promised you, Larlock," the voice told him, its tone mocking the name that he had chosen for himself. "Not her love, but she herself will be the price you pay for the gift I have promised you." He was instructed to study one of the scrolls he had recently bought back from a merchant, one he had previously been unable to decipher. But now, after more study, he found that its meaning became clear to him. It was a ritual of summoning, to call forth a Balor from the pits of hell. The Balor are powerful demons, some so powerful they rule levels of the abyss. As Larlock studied the ritual, he realized suddenly what the voice meant, and that he would have to act quickly. One of the components of the ritual of summoning was a single drop of virgin's blood. Quickly, feverishly, Larlock prepared his laboratory for the ritual of summoning. He wanted it ready for the next time he saw the princess and could invite her to have a cup of tea and talk. The next day the princess came, and he gave her tea with lots of honey, just as she liked, which also masked the taste of the herbs that would make her woozy. When she swooned, he carefully placed her as instructed, just so, inside the summoning circle, and he pricked the tip of her finger with a pin, drawing forth a single precious drop of her unsoiled blood. He burned the incense, chanted the arcane words of power, and cast the other components into the carefully fashioned circle. Great plumes of smoke billowed up, and in the middle of it stood the creature that the ritual promised. Tarnhem, the Baelor ruler of the Noisome Vale, the 498th plane of the abyss. Fury burned in the eyes of the 12-foot-tall demon, and it spread its wings menacingly, ready to thrust an accusing finger at the sorcerer, until its eyes fell on the unconscious form of the princess before it. Then a wicked grin crept onto the face of the demon. "Such an offering you give me, mortal," the demon said softly. "What is thy bidding?" From the moment he knew that the princess would be a sacrifice in this ritual, Larlock knew what he would ask of the demon. Revenge. "I want the throne of Jixidor," he said. "Done," the demon replied. Then it threw itself down over the form of the girl, its great bat-like wings giving privacy for the foul deed it perpetrated. But nothing could shield Larlock's ears from the demon's bestial grunts, or the terrible screams of horror and pain that were ripped from Cassethrie's throat as the demon ravished her with bestial brutality. When it was done, the demon simply vanished. The princess lay senseless, bruised and bleeding, and Larlock covered her with a blanket before leaving, never to return to his workshop again. Instead, he began walking toward the palace. As he approached, he first heard a commotion. Then he heard the horns and bells of alarm from the walls of the palace. Men and horses screamed as they died, and all who dared face the mighty Baelor as it rampaged through the halls and the yards and the chambers of the palace were cut down with weapons forged from searing fire. When Larlock entered the throne room, he saw he was not too late. The king and queen were still alive, surrounded by a tight ring of their most loyal and stout-hearted bodyguards. Sensing the sorcerer's arrival, the mighty Tarnhem waded into the rings of defenders and cut them down, even as Larlock moved to protect cowering servants and stood before them, shouting nonsense arcane syllables and causing harmless sparks to fly from his fingertips toward the demon. The Baelor seemed to enjoy the ruse. "You cannot stop me, wizard," it bellowed, looking at Larlock. "You are too late and too weak to save the wretched fool that has crossed me." The servants gasped, and some of the guards wavered, looking at their king with sudden suspicions. Finally, the Baelor reached out two clawed hands and grasped king and queen tightly, piercing their flesh with burning hot fingernails that were sharp as tiger's claws. As the light of life began to dim in the king's eyes, the demon delivered one final insult. "Your life is ended, but not your line. My seed has been planted in fertile soil and will grow to become your grandchild." Screams of horror rose from the throats of the king and queen as they died, and another voice, rising in power and convincing all the mortals who still drew breath of its earnestness, bellowed from Larlock, "Begone, foul demon! I send you back to the hells from whence you came!" And a jet of black energy shot out toward the creature. The demon contorted its face as though in agony, and cried out in mock terror as the portal drew it back into the abyss, sated from an afternoon of blissful mayhem. When Casethria awoke from her stupor, her mind was shattered, and she was terrified. She ran as far from Jixidor as she could, and the grateful people of the city raised Larlock to the throne for banishing the demon that had come seeking revenge on their old king. Larlock went on to become the first, and some say the most powerful, of all the sorcerer kings of Netherill's long history. History does not remember where Casethri finally stopped running, only that it was a village where she was unknown to anyone, and the memory of the horror of her ordeal could not reach her, or so she thought. 10 years went by, and the son she bore, Al-Asen Ekar Erak, grew strong, handsome, clever, and full of mischief. When he was 10, his own spark of magic first manifested, and a prank that amused his friends by scalding the tail of a neighbor's dog soon turned into an angry mob that surrounded Casethri's home with her and her child inside. "Devil spawn!" they shouted, and they accused the woman of witchcraft and of causing crops to fail and cattle to die and drought to parch the land. They nailed barricades across the doors and the windows of the house, and they set it ablaze, and they all stood outside and chanted and cheered as they heard the screams of the woman and her child as the inferno raged and the fire took them. But they failed to comb through the ashes until the following morning. They found a few fragments of bone, of course, but they had no way of knowing that the only remains were those of the mother. The flames could not touch her son. At first, he panicked and screamed along with his mother. But then when he realized the fire could not hurt him, he took on a look of wonder and fascination as he watched his mother burn alive before him. The way her skin sizzled and popped was almost funny, and the terror and agony in her eyes was something delightful to behold. But as the flames died away, Al-Asen Ekar Erak realized he wanted to be away from this place. There was a whole world to explore, and he wanted to see it all. Soon, however, he experienced the pangs of loneliness, and the loneliness gave him a purpose. The town where his mother had settled was populated by humans. She had been his only true friend, his only real confidant, and the only one who had really loved him. And they had taken her from him. Humans had. And humans would pay for his loss. All of them would.